What does peak performance mean to you?
I came up with an acronym for peak performance, which is VALOR.
Let's talk about your journey. What was the vision when you got started in the entrepreneurial space?
The vision for Entrepreneur was this was a passion project I had, but it was always on the back burner. The idea there was how do I help people's health at scale? So I was always encouraging people, you need to live a healthier lifestyle here. Doing that here and there for a person at the office or a friend or a family member, that doesn't scale to really impact the world at a deeper level.
Right. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. Welcome to Peak Performance Perspectives, where we empower entrepreneurs to master their health, wealth, and relationships. I have to start with by asking, what does peak performance mean to you?
I'm glad you asked that, Mark. I've been giving some thought to peak performance, and in honor of you, I came up with an acronym for peak performance, which is VALOR. You start with vision, know where you're going, be clear on what you want to plan and accomplish. You go to awareness, which is where you clearly outline the gap that separates you from the goal. You come up with milestones that are in between where you are today and where you want to be. L in the VALOR is for putting in the reps. And you're a lifter. You know what it means to put in those reps. That's where you show up daily, you rack up the quality hours, and you carve away at the milestones that you set in the awareness phase. Ownership, I want you to think of Stoic philosophy. That's where you own your results. Know what you can and cannot control and focus on the former, and be real about what is not serving you and bringing you closer towards accomplishing those milestones. It is a prerequisite in a lot of ways for taking responsibility. And then last, the R in VALOR is resilience. And this is when things happen, not if they happen, but when things do happen. You need to be able to navigate those inevitable storms with greater confidence and purpose. And that's where things like really good James Clear habits, having that mindset of knowing your why, that's going to serve you well when it comes to being resilient and thinking of yourself of a tree in the storm, the really brittle trees, the wind blows, it snaps their branches. The ones that are resilient and can go with that ebb and flow are the ones that are still standing after the storm is there. So in honor of you, Mark, there is the VALOR acronym for what I think of peak performance.
I'm honored and I love it. Let's start with the very first letter, vision.
Yes.
In my experience, majority of people fail right there because they don't have the right vision. The further steps they can't carry out. What does vision mean to you, and how do you go about?
So I was trained in my corporate career, I was trained in Six Sigma process design and things like that. And you couldn't be more right. Actually, the vision is the part that people think, oh, I want to be better, right? I want to make more money. I want to be richer. I want six pack. And having the vision is being really clear. So here's a little trick I used after years of doing project management. I would meet with the leader before we did a project, and I would say, project's over. It's been over for 100 days. Tell me what success looks like in detail. We're better than we were. That's not a vision. A vision is having a very clear, in a lot of cases, KPI. When you talk about, for example, when you talk about lifting, you're going to have a certain metrics of this is the body fat percentage, this is the amount of muscle I'm going to have to put on, this is the time I'm going to have to do it. As a runner, you would have to know I'm going to accomplish this race in this amount of time. And so being very specific as to where it is that the finish line is. That's what I think of with vision. And we all know it's not going to play out the way we think it is. There's going to be a lot of things that change when you're pursuing of a vision. But the point is to be extremely clear of what you think success is.
So let's say I'm an entrepreneur because this is an entrepreneur
Yeah.
podcast. I'm listening to Daniel. I'm saying I've always been a one. Daniel is now
Yeah.
motivating me to become an
Mhm.
entrepreneur. My vision is that I want to have $1 million company in 3 years. It's a specific vision. Is that the right way to get started?
I don't like that vision, and I'll say why. Just because the detail part of me says it's not going to be hard to get $1 million company if you're not making any money at all, because you can be generating sales. Does that mean $1 million in margin? Does that mean $1 million in gross? There's a lot of variability there. And then is it something you feel like, so when we talk about having that why of why you're connected to it, what are you going to sell someone else's program? Is that an entrepreneur? You could argue a real estate. This is where you need to know why it's important to develop you as a character. When you say, I have a vision for this company that I want to accomplish, know why it's important to you. How is it going to develop you as a person by achieving that goal? I don't like it when I just hear, oh, I just want to be an entrepreneur with a six-figure business. To me, that's very generic. It's not going to give you resilience when things happen, as because you don't know your why is it important to you? What are you hoping to accomplish? What is the meaning that you're hoping to add to other people's lives? When you talk about making a six-figure business, what are you talking about, Mark? You're talking about this is what I want. This is what I want other people to give me. I don't like starting a vision that way because it doesn't talk about what are you doing for other people.
So it's not just the specificity of a goal, there are other layers to it, and it digs into the why and the larger reason why we are trying to create it and many other questions that kind of
Yeah,
forms the vision.
that's correct.
I love it. Let's talk about your journey. You were an ultra marathon.
That's
Out
correct.
from that space, you were also occupying corporate jobs, doing a lot of important work. From there, you moved into entrepreneurship. You're now into a health and wellness space.
That's correct.
What was the vision when you got started in the entrepreneurial space?
In the ultra running or the entrepreneurial, which one do you want?
Entrepreneurial,
Okay.
entrepreneurial space.
The vision for entrepreneur was this was a passion project I had, but it was always on the back burner. I was a entrepreneur, as you say. I had a very cush role at my company. I was making good money. And I thought, oh, this will be, I think with the benefit of hindsight, I wanted that little check that off the box that I was an entrepreneur in some way. The idea there was how do I help people's health at scale? So I was always encouraging people, you need to live a healthier lifestyle. Here, I'll help you train. I'll meet with you and get you into running. I'll help you with your diet. Doing that here and there for a person at the office or a friend or a family member, that doesn't scale to really impact the world at a deeper level. And so what I looked at was my mission in my life, Mark, is to make healthy living accessible. And that means making it more convenient for people to live a healthier lifestyle, whether it's through awareness of what health is, whether it's what you shouldn't be doing that's taking away from your life. In the case of the Sprout Spout with that entrepreneurial journey, it was how do I make the most nutrient dense foods so accessible that people have a hard time to have an excuse not to have nutrients in their daily meals?
What do you think is the biggest barrier that is preventing people from taking control of their health today, as is?
I would say, as far as the culture that we see, it's an obsession with short-term results. So I want to lose 30 pounds or 20 pounds in 30 days or something like that. Some of these ridiculous metrics for what their vision is very flawed because going back to what you said about the entrepreneur, they're not wanting to be healthy. They're wanting to go to a wedding and be in a certain shape. They're wanting to go on vacation and be in a certain shape. That's not about being healthy. And I think even they would agree it's not sustainable. So I think what's keeping people from being healthy today is not taking that long-term vision of going, hey, it's not about what we accomplish today or even in a week or a month. It's about what are we going to do to live a life that has, instead of focusing on, say, adding years to your life, add life to your years. Make it to where you enjoy the journey, it's sustainable, you have the inertia that you need so that you're setting that long-term enjoyment cycle. It's not about hitting that quick peak, keep going back to your entrepreneurial example because it was so great. Oh, I'll be happy when I get a six-figure business. Yeah, how many entrepreneurs do we know that they finally get that six-figure business and they're like, I really don't feel any different than I did yesterday because they're just not enjoying the process there. They made themselves miserable in order to maybe accomplish that vision. And it was never about how will I enjoy the process of getting there. With health, we've got to look at what is it that we can sustain and start to enjoy our life around? Not this whole, I'm going to rely on my willpower so that I just don't eat any bad foods. And that's why they get stuck in these diet cycles. Their discipline gets strained and then they just fall off the wagon. And then, of course, on New Year's, they go, that's the day I'm getting back into this. You can't rely on willpower to give you long-term success. That is a very poor strategy. I hate to bust the bubble of people just who pull up David Goggins and think, I'm going to do that. It is not a sustainable strategy.
100%. And let me ask you this then. If willpower is not the answer, what is the answer?
The answer is having sustainable habits that move you in the right direction. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, we don't rise to our expectations, we fall to the level of our systems. And if you read any of James Clear's his book, which is absolutely profound, or listen to any time he's on a podcast, it's about making success accessible. So, for example, if you're watching too much TV, put the remote in a location where it's just really a pain in the butt to get. If you're thinking I should practice music at night, put the guitar in front of the TV so you actually have to see it. If you're not going to the gym, then do this really awkward thing of putting your work clothes in your car the night before so that you go, my work clothes are already in the car. My lunch is already packed. I have my gym clothes by the bed. It makes success, you're putting success in the way to where it's actually more inconvenient not to do the thing that you're supposed to be doing. Now, these things are silly, but they work. If you're the kind of person who, I love this example, if you're the kind of person who, when you know you're accountable to someone else, you don't want to let them down. If you go running with that person in the morning, at the end of the run, you two swap shoes so that then tomorrow, if you don't show up, they can't run. So come up with little tricks to where you put success in the way to where it's second nature. These things are second nature, and you've developed yourself into that person that just naturally says, I'm the kind of person who does these things because that's the kind of person that I want to be. You've associated your identity with the person who takes on that challenge.
Where does honesty to self comes into play with all of this?
So in the VALOR acronym there, that was ownership, which is owning the results. You need to be real about where are you putting in the work? What are you doing right? What are you doing wrong? Going back to that stoicism thing, right? Which is when you look at things from a stoic perspective, it is putting the circle around you and saying, this is as much as I can control, but if it happens outside of here, it's beyond my control. That sounds silly, but what it does is it gives you so much more peace when these things happen to you that you go, really, I could get upset about that, but it already happened. It was outside of my thing. When you're driving to a meeting, you left with plenty of time to spare. There was a wreck. You're stuck on the interstate. You're going to be there for an hour and a half. There is so many, a high percentage of people would be have the anxiety and stress the whole time they're sitting there in the traffic. A stoic person will say, it's happened. There's nothing I can do about it. It's already here. The only thing I can do is now control how the rest of the day goes and plan accordingly. That's what ownership is. That's what I think of it.
Opposite of ownership or honesty is
Mhm.
lying to self.
Yes. Rationalization.
And a lot of times, the lying to self aspect of it makes us lose the battle even before we have stepped on the grounds.
Yeah, and when you say lying to yourself, I think the first way we start to fib is we don't consider it a lie. It's a story. And rationalization is when you tell yourself a story. You have to be very careful about the stories that you're feeding to your conscious self. You don't have to say them out loud. Oh, I couldn't do it because, or that was something that happened, and so because of that, I rationalize all the time. The only problem is I've gotten a little bit better at realizing the bull crap when I hear the thought and going, that's not true. So do you want to act on it or not? I do a cold plunge in the mornings. I have the cold plunge tank. I love it. But do you know that I still most mornings will rationalize why I don't need to go there in the morning? I'm like, I actually had a couple things I was going to do first. And I know good once I get into my day, I'm not going to journal in the middle of the day or in the evening. I journal first thing in the morning or it generally doesn't happen. I'm not going to cold plunge later in the day generally. It's do it first thing in the morning or it doesn't happen. I still hear those stories every single day. It's just being real about when that voice comes, the resistance that's in our head. By the way, it's integrated into our code. You can't get rid of that voice, but you can get better at whether you choose to believe it or not.
I also love that you know yourself that if I don't do this in the morning, it's just not going to get done. And there is a level of acceptance there that it's so much better to know what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, what our circumstances are before, like you said, telling stories and making commitments to ourselves that are not in congruence with our personalities.
And going back to what you're saying about goals and why people don't achieve them, they're not being honest with themselves of that they don't know themselves well enough to set that goal. So when you say something like, I'm going to lose 20 pounds in 30 days, you don't know the person you are well enough to know that's not a realistic goal. Somehow you've rationalized in your head, this all makes sense and I can pull it off. Being real with yourself means, is this when we talk about vision, Mark, there's plenty of people out there with a vision where you go, that's not realistic for you, or that's not something that's necessarily achievable in that span of time, given your history of experience, right? So I think being real with ourselves and being honest with ourselves is you have to deal, like I think the oldest words ever written on a stone wall was know thyself, right? And it's a very hard thing to do because you have to be real and say, is this the person I am?
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. You said losing 20 pounds in 30 days is not possible. You should know yourself enough to know that's an unattainable goal. I'm going to say, why? I'm looking at men and women who are posting before and after pictures of incredible transformations in 20 days. I'm looking at Captain America training for the role, and in 3 months, he just went from a skinny 108-pound guy 200 to a 240 guy jacked guy. I think there is something wrong with me that everybody else can do it, but
Yeah.
I can't. What do you say to that?
I say C.S. Lewis wrote the lines that comparison is the thief of joy. And when you talk about what you're seeing in a social media perspective, you're taking a very small snapshot of someone's life. And if you're basing your life on that, that is a faulty comparison. When we see an artist who has overnight success, we forget the part that it was 10 years in the making. That's the part they're not seeing, Mark, when they look at those posts of look at these results. When I say that I look at somebody and say sometimes, hey, that goal of you losing 20 pounds in 30 days is not, it's not realistic for you. I'm talking about people who are not training at all. And they think I'm just going to hop off the couch and pull this off. And I say, you're most likely going to get hurt. If you go in there and start running 5 miles a day off the couch, you're going to get yourself hurt. That's what I mean about not knowing yourself. It's about that's not sustainable either. So when your goal is being driven by someone else's objective of success, that's a gateway to rationalization.
I continue to play devil's advocate. I would say, Daniel, comparison is the only way we know if there is more left in us and what to do. If I am running at a certain speed and finishing a marathon at a certain speed, and I think that's the best speed that has ever been possible by anybody, and
Mhm.
someone else beats me, now, due to comparison, I have a reason to push myself. So why wouldn't I look at people who have achieved something that I haven't achieved and try to measure up to them?
Trying to measure up is one thing. I think when it comes to when you say if anyone beats me at a particular thing, that means that I'm not good enough. You're setting yourself up for a very miserable life because you're always going to compare yourself to someone who is the best in class. You're not going to be the vast majority of the listeners of this podcast are never going to be able to run like a Kenyan on a marathon. And if that's your benchmark for success, you're going to be very disappointed. You're a lifter. What if you went out there and said, I need to look like Chris Bumstead or I'm a failure? You're going to be disappointed. There's a lot of people out there who've been lifting for 30 years with everything they've got, and they don't look anywhere close to that. If your whole benchmark for success is objectively set, you're not looking at what the best self is, of what your best self is. John Wooden was one of the best basketball coaches of all time. And he used to tell people at the end of every basketball game, he would tell, you know, in your heart, if you played your best, regardless of what's on that scoreboard. Meaning you can win and have not played anywhere near your best just because you weren't being drawn into basically a competitive field. And you can get beat pretty bad and say, man, that was the best match. You may be a runner who sets your personal PR at a marathon, but you didn't place. These are things where, going back to stoicism, are you focusing on what's within your control? So when I was a competitive endurance athlete, for example, there were races where whether I was on the podium or not sometimes had to do with who happened to show up that day to that race. If they brought someone from out of town that was really good ultra runner, I knew I'm not going to be on that podium. Now, if I had set my whole idea of success about whether I made the podium or not, that would have really been a disappointing outcome. Instead, what I tended to focus on was, did I run the race that I trained for? Right? I had my own goals. I had my own, if you can get to this, if you can run 100 miles in less than 24 hours on this race course, that was my goal. There were people who did it in 20 hours. And if my whole thing was they did it faster than me, so I can't be happy, that would have been a very unfulfilling effort. I would have looked at all the work I put in and said, failure. First of all, I hear that voice in my head every day. You are a failure. You are not measuring up. Going back to rationalization, it is a choice. Do I accept this voice as the truth or not?
Talked about vision, talked about ownership, talked about truthfulness to self, understanding that we mustn't live our lives comparing ourselves to others, because that is not a life that will is worth living, because we'll never measure up to certain types of people with certain types of genetics and sorts of backgrounds. Now, if my listener is thinking, okay, I get it. I have a little bit of a clearer vision and I am a little bit understanding of what I am or not able to do. I want to get into a better shape for my
Mhm.
family, but I'm very busy. And my energy levels, Daniel, by the end of the day are tanking, and I don't feel like going to the gym. What are some actionable strategies
Yeah.
you would tell for somebody who wants to optimize their energy level because they're juggling too many busy schedules just to
Yeah.
get started on their fitness journey?
The first thing I would say for optimizing, I'm going to actually answer two of your questions because I love it when you play devil's advocate, by the way. For optimizing your energy level, which my podcast is called Chasing Energy. So I talk a lot about how do you manage your energy. The first thing I'll tell people is, believe it or not, your willpower is at an all-time high early in the day. So when you think of willpower, think of a bucket of water that is slowly being drained through the day. With few exceptions, you're never going to add water back to that during the day. There's a few exceptions there where sometimes where you can take a nap or some type of meditation meal today and get a little bit refreshed. But for the most part, that bucket's going down through the day. You need to place, going back to placing success in the way, you need to be real and say, look, if I don't get the workout in a lot of cases, if I don't get the workout in before I go to the office, it's just not going to happen. That's about being honest with yourself and saying, look, I'm just not the kind of person who likes to work out in the evenings. It's not something I enjoy. Do I have the discipline later in the day to do that? So when you talk about people who can't make time, there's a couple of things there. Number one is you don't want to dial it all the way in. Don't sign up for a gym and then if you're used to getting up at 7 a.m., suddenly you have to get up at 5 a.m. That jump is going to hit you hard. The better thing is just slowly turn the dial back. So if you're used to getting up at 7 and you have to leave for work at 7:30 or 7:45, what you want to do is start dialing it back like 15, 20 minutes a day to where you are going for a nice walk 20, 30 minutes in the morning before you have to get ready for work. If you're walking 20 to 30 minutes and that becomes easy for you, then you can start dialing it to where you get in a jog. These are things where we're slowly turning the temperature up to where our body doesn't feel completely drained and overwhelmed by the change that we're trying to cause. The other thing I want to say is when we go about this journey, going back to your earlier question, where do I get the energy? Some of the times when I need the energy, and you were basically saying, what about these people who have these great successes and I'm not having these successes? Don't ever underestimate the power of putting yourself around people who pull the best out of you. So, for example, I'm meeting someone to do my longest run in a while. I'm not an ultra runner right now, but I still train pretty hard. And what I did in order to make sure I didn't skimp on that run was I told someone I'll run with you in the morning and that will be the second half of the run. So I know there's an accountability of he's going to be there at that time. I will have already done X number of miles. I'll meet him and then we'll finish it out together. My mind is telling me I don't want to disappoint that person. And it's going to carry me emotionally because my willpower will be once I'm talking to somebody and we're doing it together, it doesn't take that much willpower. This is why people love group classes. You show up to a group class, the work is done when you show up because once you show up to class, you're not going to skip it. I love that about those things. When I do the cold plunge in the morning, do you know the hardest part of doing the cold plunge is putting the sandals on when I go outside because I've never put my sandals on and turned around and gone back inside. So I know that once I put those sandals on, it's game on. We're going in this thing. Figure out ways like that where it doesn't take so much willpower to get to success. You have a friend that's going to meet you at 7 a.m. and you guys walk your dogs together. Okay, that's a start. They're going to be there, and having someone with you, it takes a lot of that willpower out of the equation.
There's that famous quote that says, "You're the average of the 5 people you hang out
Yeah,
with, or 10 people you hang out
yeah,
with."
Jim Rohn.
I always jokingly tell my students, your job when you join a group is to bring that average down, which means that
That's
everybody
right.
else is,
It's the
right?
same way in real estate, man. You want the cheapest house on the block.
Yeah. If you're bringing the average up, you're in the wrong group, which means that everybody else is not as good as you are. You got
Yeah,
much to learn. Let's talk about this slow incremental goal setting that you
yeah.
talked about, right?
Mhm.
It's so commonsensic, right? If I'm in a calorie deficit, I don't have to go on 1,000 calories a week deficit. I can start with 100 calories a day. That's 700. I can start with 500 calories a day, 70 deficit, 3,500 calories, which is 1 pound of fat. Makes complete sense. If I am completely sedentary, let's start with walking 4,000 steps a day, work up to 5,000. The concept of setting small goals and building on top of that is really not revolutionary, but almost everybody fails at it. What do you think it is about our human psyche? Even though it is so simple, we don't get it. We can't stick to it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a human psyche or the American culture, but I think it's the desire for immediate results now, where I've been doing this walk every morning for the last 2 weeks and I haven't lost much weight at all. Or what we see a lot of times, Mark, is they lose a pound or two and then they put on a pound the next week and they're just completely flabbergasted. This was a waste of time, right? So you need to go beyond, sometimes you need to go beyond your KPIs and say, is this behavior driving me towards the type of person I want to be? In business, if you're an entrepreneur and you said to yourself, my sales weren't this week what they were last week. This is a failure of a business. Do you really think that the growth in life or business is this perfect chart of each week it gets better and better? There's those ebbs and flows. The point of me talking about your vision and knowing your why is so that when those ebbs and flows happen, you go, this is driving me closer to the person I want to be. And it's not a clear line, but there is going to be a line that eventually drives me up to where I want to be. That fluctuation in there, that's real life. That's the minutia of everything that's impacting you. We all know when you're training for a goal that there's a funeral in the family. So you miss 2 training sessions and then your kid gets sick and you have to call into work and you're not able to work on the business stuff that week because they were sick for 3 days. These are all things that happen. The difference is people with a clear vision and a commitment to it, these things happen and they say, I will get back on track. I will use this especially when things happen. I love to use that and say, okay, this is your chance to rebuild that willpower and the desire. Every time I ever got injured when I was training for an ultra run, I wanted it even worse when I came back if I was nursing a torn hamstring or hurt my foot. I would sit there and say, each day that this injury is here is going to serve as proof that I'm more dedicated to this goal than I ever was. And the other part of that is to say, since we're talking about the physical realm, injuries are a riddle. Anytime you are injured, you have to figure out now, how can I train around this injury that I can still make progress towards my goal and not make this injury worse?
Let's talk about the importance of sleep, especially in the entrepreneurial world. There is some type of a medal, like an imaginary
Yeah.
medal one gives themselves by talking about how little I sleep. You have role models like Elon Musk talking about how he never sleeps more than 4 hours a day, and the implication is that therefore I'm so productive. In your experience, not only as a coach and a teacher, but as someone who has formed at extremely high levels, both mentally and physically, what is the importance of sleep in optimal health and cognitive function?
It is the foundation. It is the foundation of growth. Here's a little tip for your listeners. You don't actually, when you lift or run, you don't actually get better until you recover from that workout. That's what drives the improvement. So if you're not sleeping well, you're not getting the recovery, which means lifting and running and doing 4 to 5 hours of sleep, you're basically not going to reap the benefits from that training. If you look at the world-class performers, Bron James, Nadal, Federer, look at their sleeping habits. It's 9 hours a day. Tom Brady, 9 to 10 hours a day. They're on to something, which is you have to put in the rest. Going back to the willpower thing, if you're not getting enough sleep, how do you think you're going to have the willpower to execute at your best? I don't know of a hack that says I've never seen anyone sustainably go more than a few nights with low sleep. The other thing is that I have a phrase that I've had on my podcast a few times when I have a sleep specialist on, and it is, I have never experienced joy, intrinsic joy, after 2 nights of sleep deprivation. It's a slog. So if you are convincing yourself, that medal of honor, that this is the path to success, burning the midnight oil, etc., and we'll just forget about all the obvious long-term health issues that can come from sleep deprivation. What I would say is you're not going to enjoy the journey to that success. What you're going to, if you look at a lot of these health influencers like the Brian Johnson and all these health hackers, look at what drove them to change so much. And they'll almost always say, I was ruining my life by pursuing a goal at all cost. And now what have they done? They basically said, I want to try to capture as much as my health back as I can humanly put back, right? They're trying to undo the damage they did and make up for it. And that damage came from sacrificing sleep at all cost.
When you were an ultra marathon runner, competitive, now you're just doing it for life fitness. But when you were a competitive athlete, were there times when you felt like there is more in the tank, but for some reason, I'm just not able to pull it out? Maybe there were times when you knew you needed to train, you just didn't. Or this nagging feeling that there's something within you that's just sabotaging your own success. When you look back at it, now as a teacher, now as a coach, what advice would you have given yourself back then so that you didn't sabotage yourself?
Yeah.
Because self-sabotage is a real thing.
I'm not going to tell you the answer that most people are going to expect. Most people are going to expect that I do this speech where I say, I knew I had more in the tank than I did. I wish I would have known that I had more resilience than I did. My problem was the exact opposite. I did not respect my rest days. I did not, when I went out to train, what should have been an easy effort, like a run where I could easily talk, which if you ever look at the world's best athletes, 70 to 80% of their efforts is a conversational pace, but they're putting in a lot of volume. The Tour de France riders, they are putting in a ton of volume at a conversational pace. That high intensity Rocky montage effort is only 10 to maybe 20% of your weekly volume. So the first thing I would say is I sabotaged my success because I was constantly self-shaming myself and saying, what, you finished this workout and you still feel good? That's not how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be so tired you get back home and feel like you're going to throw up. So I trained for years. And then when I had an off day, I would have so much self-shame that I would say, you didn't do anything today. You didn't run any miles. Other people are out there running more miles than you. Look at these people out there who are logging all these runs and you're being left behind. Get out there and get a run in. I was supposed to take the day off, but I've got some energy. Let me go do it. What do you think happens after 2, 3 months of doing that? You're not performing at your peak. You're basically just pushing through and you're not recovering properly. Your legs are constantly sore. You don't sleep as well. You would think, oh, if you're training that much, you must be sleeping like a rock. No, when you're overtraining, it makes it so hard to fall asleep and stay asleep because you're just constantly tossing and turning. Your body's breaking down. So the number one piece of advice I would have given myself is do your easy days easy, do your hard days hard, and don't confuse the two of those things. When it's a day where you're just putting in the reps and conserving your willpower, do that. When it comes to lifting, by the way, I lifted the entire time I was a runner. I went to the gym. I lifted way too hard. I had some rule in my head that you had to go to failure every single set. And I was doing a lot of sets. What was I doing? My body was constantly breaking down. So, for example, I'll be specific so this is not nebulous. In terms of lifting, if my max on a set was 10 reps, for all but maybe 2 or 3 sets that day, I should have stopped at 8. You get almost the exact same benefits for strength and muscle if you stop at 8 and then only go to your max maybe 1 or 2 sets. Instead, I would go to 10 until failure every single set, whether I was squatting, benching, curling, shoulder press. That is a lot of training on top of running to where you're just pushing your body to its absolute limit and it doesn't know how to recover or what to prioritize at that point. So my advice to myself was I was sabotaging my success because I didn't have a good perspective of who I was. I always consider myself as just falling a little bit short of where I needed to be.
So many of us, there are some of us that really truly don't know what to do. And when they hear podcasts like this,
Yeah.
they get ideas, they write down tips, and they're able to now come up with a plan to move along on their journey. But a vast majority of us, we know exactly what we need to do. Listen to this podcast and we say, yes, Daniel, I know what you're saying. I have known for a while this is the way to go about it. But just like everybody else, the minutia of life gets in the way. And I wake up and all of a sudden I wonder, how did I get here? Life just passed by me.
Mm-hmm.
5, 10, 15 years just passed by me. What advice do you have for someone like that? So we can this journey again.
You know that phrase, the best time to plant a tree was 15 years ago. The next best time is going. I know I keep bringing this up, but going back to that Stoic philosophy, that sunk cost, you got to let go of that. That's just all that's going to do is self-shame you. So let's use the example of work because I can definitely speak to this. I stayed in my corporate career way longer than I should have because I was comfortable. And I kept coming up with reasons, well, I'm doing this for the kids. I'm doing it for this. And there was, by the way, for many years that was true, but there came a point where I started questioning whether it was still the truth. Now, I could have sat there and said, I'm already in my mid 40s and it's not a good idea to switch now. If I had started in my 20s or 30s, like Mark Zuckerberg, and that's not the truth. In fact, if you look at your average entrepreneurial age, I want to say the average entrepreneur is something like 52. So they've actually know how to run a business because they've worked in enough corporate backgrounds. But when you're focusing on the sunk cost, it's just an example of whining. You're just whining to the universe. You're whining to your friends. What's that old phrase? The older I get, the better I was. You're looking for pity and sympathy from people when what you should be saying is, okay, that phrase, so what? So what? Now what? Right? Given that this has happened, how can I steer it to what is within my control now that I can make the best? When you're in the Ironman, I don't know if you've ever done an Ironman and you blow a tire, your time for that Ironman, whatever your goal was, it is not going to be, you generally don't plan on a flat tire. But then you have to ask the question, so what? Now, do I just go ahead and turn my bike in or do I change the tire and realize I'm going to lose like 10 minutes off what I had? That's a sunk cost. That's a thing that happens. Make peace with it and move on.
In a world where there are influencers telling you if you don't wake up at 3:30 in the morning and start training, you're a man.
Yeah.
In a world where people are telling you sleep as little as you can so that you can be productive, and if you're sleeping 7, 8 hours, you're just lazy. In a world where we are made to feel ashamed of ourselves for not having grand goals that we want to achieve in record time, you, Daniel, are telling the truth. There are certain types of messages that are sexy and attractive, and there are certain type of messages that are truth and effective. And talking to you, having gotten to know you a little bit, you are just the type of person who has no interest in fake sexiness. You have interest in real results. The way you explain things, the way you teach things, the way you think things, the way you set goals, the way you describe what someone's vision should be and how to go about it. Every ounce of every that you said earns nothing but utmost respect from me. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on my show. Any last words for our audience members?
Yeah, I love how you're wrapping this up. And my thought there, because you kept saying you're seeing this thing on Instagram where people sleep 4 hours, and you're seeing this thing on Instagram where this person's selling their company that they only had for a year for 8 figures. And my comment to those people is that you might be following the wrong people. And you need to be real careful about who you idolize and put on that pedestal. It's almost like these two young celebrities get married and look how happy they are and look at this vacation. Do you want to idolize your relationship based on the latest celebrity marriage? Really? Because if you want the good that you see other people, the success that other people are having, you have to be willing to take it it has to come with the consequences and the time that they've put in. And not many of us want to do that. So be careful about who you follow. Definitely follow Mark because he's a leader in the thought space. He drove me to step up to my better self today. I love the devil's advocate part, by the way.
Daniel, thank you for so much for being on the show. I hope to talk to you soon.